Johnston here from HJC and Dennis McCarthy from Blackbaud. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to speak for the next hour on the next generation of giving study that's been done in Canada, and we'll make reference from time to time about the U.S. study as well. So introductions, thank you for being here. I wanted to give you a few house cleaning tips here. One, we want you to ask questions along the way, and we've got Mark McGrath here at HJC to handle the questions. So type those questions in. We'll stop and answer them if we have to. This is adult learning and participation. We want to go back and forth. We'll try to leave a few minutes at the end to make sure that we can answer questions we may not be able to get to during the session. It's a lot of content, and I want to just remind you that you can, if you haven't downloaded the report, you can, and we'll make sure you have a link to that thereafter. But also, if you've downloaded the report and now you're here for a conversation about it, we want to remind you that we want this document to allow you to be change agents for integrated marketing and fundraising, to use this conversation today in partnership with the report to make your organizations more effective. And we want to make sure that you have a chance to win an hour with an HJC consultant or myself to look at integrated fundraising or digital fundraising. Make sure you fill out the survey at the end of the session. And remember, if you don't have time now to scribble down that long address, you'll have this email to you and you can subsequently go to the survey. And the last point that came from Dennis was the fact that we want you to have 2 or 3 pieces of paper in front of you, and as we're going through, we're going to have a test or two. We want you to be writing down lateral, great ideas about your organization and better next-gen fundraising. So make sure you've got some paper and a pen or pencil, and we'll jump right in. So the next generation of giving really has at its heart this key idea that research and data and knowledge about our sector makes us more effective. Because I think if we ask the question of the group listening in, raise your hands virtually if you have unlimited marketing dollars, no one would put up their hand. So this putting our hands around a report that makes us more effective with our rationed resources is really at the heart of this exercise with the next generation of giving report. And I tend to think of someone who represents what we're trying to get at here. I'll ask people to type in, does anyone know who this is? I'll call them the archetypal next generation of giving researcher. Type in now, and I'll give you a surprise. Don't Google it, don't find it, and then give the answer. I'll send someone one of my books if in the next 2 seconds you can put in who you think this is. I don't see anyone putting it in. I have someone, I've got a little clue, something a lot of people like to put, hipsters like to put it on their donuts now. There we go. So someone has got Sir Francis Bacon. Why Sir Francis Bacon? Sir Francis Bacon was the father of empiricism, and when we look at this quote from Sir Francis Bacon, the more one knows, the more one can control events, is really at the heart of the research, at the heart of the enterprise with this next generation of giving report. And so with that, I will hand it over to Dennis, who will give you a sense of and test your sense of the current fundraising reality for the sector in Canada and for your organization.
Thank you, Mike. That's great. This is Dennis McCarthy from Blackbaud. I'm actually at Target Analytics, a division of Blackbaud, and it's great to present with Mike today and for you all to spend some time with us. Mike, you're going to move the slides along for me when we're ready to do that?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
You are a fabulous person. So again, lots of questions are great. So we all know the current fundraising reality we all deal with, whether we're small organizations or larger organizations that span across Canada, donor files and acquisition list sources are shrinking. It's become very difficult to raise money. We're often in multiple channels trying to find new supporters, convert new supporters from events, from Canvas and door-to-door, from telemarketing, and it's become very hard to be able to maintain that forward momentum, because the reality is most of our supporters and for many organizations are greater than 65 and 70 years old. Mike? So revenues are flat, and as I referenced, in many cases falling. For most organizations, much of their money is raised through direct response, mail and telephone. And those costs are getting higher. Labor costs go up. Health insurance goes up, at least in the U.S. We have all kinds of challenges around that, and it forces us to be innovative in a way that we perhaps hadn't done before if we want to continue to serve the folks that we serve. Right?
So when we think about that current reality, when we think about this hyper-competitive marketplace we're in Canada, when we were constructing the questions for the next generation of giving in Canada, I just sat back and wondered, what would Bacon ask? What would the father of empiricism ask if he was a fundraiser? And so back in the 16th century, what are the kinds of questions he would have? Like, "Hail, angry peasant, what skullduggery do you intend with that pitchfork?" Or, "How could thou deny the vital nutritional content of this homebrewed ale?" But more serious questions, and these are the kinds of questions we've asked in the Next Gen report, and some of you have seen as you've read through it. I mean, does age influence who you give to? What are the basic do's and don'ts for fundraisers this year and beyond, considering the trending we see in this report? We often hear the question, what are the preferred channels for giving of each generation? Are they the same? Are they different? What are the preferred communications and engagement channels? So outside of transacting a gift, how do they want to stay in touch and learn more outside of giving? And one reminder I'll give to you, that if you take this bacon-flavored report, we find that for boards of directors, so think about this, either for senior management for your organization or for board of directors, take this report. When we send you the slide deck, use some of these slides in a board setting, and I did that last night for a hospital foundation here in Toronto. It can help frame further investment or to shift investment, thinking about how generational giving and channel giving is changing. So when I think of integrated next generation giving in Canada, it's this integration of these four moving arrows in the middle. Integration of technology, integration of all levels of giving, integration of multiple channels, and integration between departments, whether that's departments within an organization's fundraising or non-fundraising and fundraising departments. And I think when we see better integration and sensitivity to generational giving, then we see the donor pyramid or the donor ziggurat being bigger and more substantial in all areas of giving. And we'll take a look at some quick examples here. One of my favorite examples for the last few years of integrated multi-channel fundraising is this self-identification survey that was conducted by Sick Kids here in Toronto. Children's Hospital that worked together as a team to send out a digital survey. So there was an annual fund group, there was planned giving, and they put together a series of questions that captured people's interests in smaller gift giving, monthly giving, middle donor, larger gift, and planned giving potential. And you can see here on the screen that digital and integrated approach found new bequests, leads for people who want tea and crumpets and talk about leaving something in their estate, and then six-figure gifts self-identified in the survey. So again, just to go back and think about that donor pyramid, here's a new channel, digital, capturing very traditional gifts. And at the very bottom, you can see SurveyMonkey and Razor's Edge had an API that connected all 5,500 answers and ported all of that detail as flagged or actionable items within Razor's Edge. And I often inappropriately call that crack cocaine for fundraisers. I mean, all of that unbelievable data automated and going into Razor's Edge. And so in that case, with Sick Kids, there were happy generational surprises. Donors, in this case, 35 to 45, were thinking of legacy gifts, but thinking of gifts of stock. And they were heavily overrepresented in LinkedIn. And from that finding, a LinkedIn strategy for gifts of stock from younger donors. So if there's a better example of integrated fundraising and next generational giving, I'd love to see it. But it's a reminder to you to begin to think in new and innovative ways like Dennis was talking about. And just to remind you that Canada leads the pack in this sort of integrated multi-gift pipeline approach, here's a higher education institution in Canada that sent a digital survey to its alumni, and you can see on the screen finding bequests and middle donor gifts and larger endowment opportunities for a very low-cost digital survey. This is new, and this connects to the Next Gen study, that things are happening that never happened before in new channels, and we need to prepare better integrated plans to do that. And even going farther, here's a Canadian animal welfare organization who did the same digital self-identification, and fantastic results in front of you. So integrated fundraising and next-gen fundraising includes all levels of giving being better connected to build better pipelines, and respecting the fact that all age subsets, including older individuals, are revealing large gifts through new channels. So things are changing for the better and getting more exciting and challenging at the same time. So I'll hand it back to Dennis.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I really do think, and Mike, you and I sit on a group called the Integrated Marketing Advisory Board, and some of the greatest examples of integrated marketing have come out of Canada. And I think some of those examples, both around higher ed and animal welfare, would be our astounding examples for North America. And that's just great stuff that shows what generational data and being open to new approaches can mean. So let's go to one of my favorite slides, the bubble slide.
Fantastic.
Advance.
We are.
There we are, the bubble slide. We always have these, and I think they're required in just about any presentation, is that you have with large colored bubbles. So here what the intent here is to look at the 4 age cohorts and look at what % give. And I have to say I was really surprised by Gen Y and how generous they are. But also look at Gen X and Boomers right next to each other. And Gen X is actually, I believe, giving slightly more than matures. So those are two things that are different than in the States. In the States, while Boomers certainly are the largest, most generous group as a whole, matures are second, and Gen X is much more like Gen Y. So that's really quite different, and I'll give Mike credit for this, but Mike's theory around this is that the economic challenges that have happened in the United States are different than, and perhaps more severe than they were in Canada. And so perhaps the Gen X cohort hasn't felt that, and they've not been quite as anxious about their giving, feeling more secure. But again, we're seeing that people are giving to a select number of charities. And when we look, and it's in the report, you'll often see that people aren't necessarily thinking about dramatically expanding the number of charities they give to, so the notion of loyalty really comes to mind. So now grab one of those sheets of paper, please, and a number 2 pencil, and we're about to go to our next slide. So I'm going to give you a minute, and I'd like you to draw your bubbles. Think about your group of constituents, and what of your constituents, what are the size of the bubbles for Gen Y, Gen X, Boomers, and Matures? Where do you think they fit? So I've got Eastern time of about 1:18. Let's go to about 19 past the hour. Let's give you a minute and draw your bubbles and think about this. And as Mike said, and use Mike's lovely phrase, some lateral thinking here to bring back to your staff and perhaps to your senior managers and talk with them about what do our supporters look like. Are we all older? Are there some exciting young people in here, as Mike showed around that LinkedIn work, where some of those younger donors are already thinking about significant gifts, where you ordinarily wouldn't have done that? So a little bit more time. Okay, let's put our paper aside and our pencils down for a moment. And Mike, let's go to our first quiz. Okay. So what I'd like you to do now is to do a little free association. So can we move the slide forward? Let's see how this works in real life. Okay, and on the left we've got the generations, and on the right we've got both channel and areas of interest. And think about for a moment with your other sheet of paper, write them down, Gen Y, Mature, Gen X, Boomer, Animal Protection through Arts, what you think might map to what. So it's 20 past the hour, we'll give you 30 seconds, and then
we'll reveal it. So go with your gut. You know, Gen Y gives more, gives at a higher rate per capita to one area of giving on the right-hand side than the others. Same with Mature, Gen X, and Boomers. So, you know, what are they particularly interested in more than the other generational groups? So we'll give you a few more seconds. Don't overthink this. Go with your gut. Just draw those lines back and forth, and we'll see if anyone can get it right. And since this is a webinar, if people can be honest.
There are no grades.
Dennis, are you?
I'm ready. Okay, so let's go for, let's see if Boomer. Oh, there's Mature to Arts. Next one, Mike.
Boomer.
To door, which I would have never figured when I saw that. Gen Y to Human Rights, and Gen X, we press it again, to Animal Protection. So according to the survey, this is what people map to, which I found to be really quite interesting. And you might want to think about how might that impact your organization.
And did anyone get them all right? Mark sitting here. If anyone wants to put up their virtual hand and tell Mark that they got them all right, we'll follow up with a door prize. Okay, so I'll pass it back to top tier and bottom tier causes to you, Dennis.
Thank you very much, Mike. So one of the things we looked at were what were the types of charities, the kinds of charities that the different cohorts supported, and what did they think was a priority. And I have to say, it was an interesting result. As you can see, health charities ranked first and was also the top as a priority. But the number 2 priority was children's charities, and then local social service and places of worship. And what was particularly interesting is health charities rank about 4th in the U.S., and we did a similar ranking. But in Canada, and I know Mike's got some theories on this, it ranks number 1 and does fairly strong, although it's dropping a little bit with Gen X. But across the board, a very strong showing. And what also dropped, in my theory, was emergency relief. And my thought on that is, thankfully, we have had few emergencies this year, other than some real tragedies in Africa and in Syria, but not some of the apocalyptic natural disasters that we've seen in the past in places like Japan and Micronesia. So perhaps that's caused some of it. And then causes that unfortunately didn't rank at all really did quite poorly. And we look at veterans, and it really popped out for Matures, as did arts-related. And there you see human rights, which really resonates with Gen Y. Perhaps they're more international orientation, an orientation impacted post 9/11. but really was a little surprising, but not dramatically so. Mike, back to you, sir.
Sure. Thanks, Dennis. So, as you heard, there have been parallel studies done in the United States and Canada for generational giving, and I just wanted to remind people with this New Yorker cartoon about the results themselves. An American saying, "You seem familiar, yet somehow strange. Are you by any chance Canadian?" I think we see the same sentiment in the results themselves, that most of the results are tracking comfortably the same, reasonably the same, yet there are bits and pieces that are different, and we reference some of that in the next generation of Canadian giving, but I think the best thing to do would be to go and download the U.S. Next Generation report. We'll make sure you have a link to that, and read through the two reports and see if you can glean differences that or similarities, but mainly differences that give you a competitive advantage, thinking through what's a strength in Canadian giving. And so along those lines, when we compare channel participation in giving between the two countries, we see that honor memorial giving is reasonably and statistically significantly higher in Canada. If we see door-to-door canvassing as much higher in Canada across all age subsets, monthly debit giving is higher. I think this is just a reminder. So I want you to go through and say, well, if honor memorial giving is per capita higher, maybe we are a more mature market. Am I doing enough in that area of giving to leverage that advantage? And am I doing enough to take care of and take advantage of the higher per capita door-to-door canvassing going on? And then finally, with monthly giving as more mature, am I doing enough with my files and in my prospecting to take advantage of that Canadian maturity in monthly giving? So let's move on to our next 7-year-old or 8-year-old quiz. We're going to do some more associations. I want you to get the piece of paper out again and write down on the left-hand side the 4 generations. Let's on the right-hand side write 4 channel approaches to giving. And I'll give you 1 minute. Looking at it's 1:26. I'll give you a minute and a half. Let's draw these back and forth. You know, each of these generational subsets give more to one of these 4 types of giving channels. Let's guess what they are. Dennis will create music as we're waiting.
If I had any musical ability, I would do that, Mike. Isn't there like music they play between hockey periods or something like that we could play?
Well, yeah.
Probably varies by team.
Yeah, we could do some Stompin' Tom Connors songs about hockey and picking tobacco in Tilsonburg and things like that, but we won't do that.
Could work.
So, everyone finish up. And matures give more to telemarketing than other age subsets. Boomers, door-to-door. Gen Y, I believe no surprise there. And Gen X, online giving. So we'd love to hear who got them all right. We might have quite a few people. But we would love to hear, tell Mark in the text who got them right, and we'll make sure that we recognize you at least. And if there aren't too many of you, we might send out some prizes. So think about the lines you drew. If you got some wrong, like it's much more interesting to think why you got those wrong. How does that make you step back and think about the different channel approaches? So let's look more deeply into that now. This is replicating and adding to a slide that was very popular with Next Generation Giving 3 years ago. we looked at and we asked people, have you donated in these ways in the last 2 years? We asked the same one this time, and you can see the asterisk choices on the left-hand side going down are new ways to give that were not included last time. The main reason we didn't include them last time is we wanted to exactly parallel the prior next-gen U.S. giving study. So this time we had a chance to match them, and by matching them we also got to add a few. The arrows pointing up or down are statistically significant differences between the two studies, either increasing or decreasing. You can see at the very top checkout donations. So for any of you who have had a rough day, you go to the government liquor or beer store, you buy a bottle to forget the day, and then they ask if you'd like to give $2 to the children's hospital in your city. That's the kind of charitable checkout donations we're talking about, and you can see it's significant and of the highest per capita participation across all the ages. You can see online giving has gone up statistically significantly. You can see that Gen X has gone up to 55%, but a reminder that older age subsets also use digital and new methods. You can see 31% of matures are giving online. You can see honor tribute giving has gone up and rises in per capita participation with age. Natural progression. You can see talking to people at the door, on the street, these are quite important. So as much as we see a lot of organizations saying we're getting out of the business of knocking on people's doors and talking to them and asking for gifts, you can see street canvassing, door to door, these are all in the upper echelon of percentage participation and still need to be thought of as a piece of the integrated fundraising model. You can see with email that was added, so people remembering a direct email solicitation that influenced their giving. You can see, interesting, that matures at 14% are being influenced and are giving through that method as much as Gen X and almost the same as Gen Y. So important to see that. You can see the telephone is much higher with older age subsets. And when we look at radio TV, it's interesting to see that. I mean, there are some fundraising empires in Canada built on television fundraising, but in the aggregate, it's just not as deeply embedded across all age subsets like some of the channel choices above radio and TV. And then you can see at the bottom, mobile text, social networking, you know, to make the joke and to slightly alter Churchill's quote, I mean, never have so many given so little when we look at social networking. And important to note that we have a new white paper on social media and social network fundraising coming out very soon, and you'll see at the end of this presentation we have an October 10th session. Someone has a question around a third-party vendor, and meaning someone who has a product or service in the commercial sense where proceeds from that, so it's slightly different than purchase from proceeds, but it's someone who has a separate service. We'll give you a clear definition in our follow-up. Thanks. So the next slide is perhaps not fair on a Wednesday in the afternoon, but let's stare at this for a second and also get some context. We asked people, you know, which solicitation channels are acceptable, somewhat acceptable, very acceptable, or very unacceptable. And you can see, of course, and I think it makes some sense, that getting a solicitation from a friend or a friend's relative or child is the most acceptable. The more personal it is, the more acceptable. The more passive channels are right below. And when we go right to the very bottom, under the fold, the red line, the DMZ of acceptableness, you can see here that the more active or, quote, in-your-face channels are the least acceptable. Now, it's important, and Dennis and I have talked about this before, and many of you on the phone know this, the more active channels at the bottom can be so effective, but it needs to be done correctly with the knowledge in hand that it's seen as touchy, somewhat unacceptable or unacceptable. It has to be done very carefully. So, I mean, if I show this slide and finding to a board of directors, they'll say, we are never in a million years doing the kind of fundraising at the bottom. But we know if they're done right, they're very effective. So I would just say be very careful with these findings and find the right approach to frame the conversation within your organization. So when we look at people's giving channels, if we looked at those age subsets, I often say that Canadian donors are grizzly bears. No, they're not grizzly bears. They are omnivorous donors in the fact that they graze on many different channels at many different times. And let me try to put this into context. I was at a board of directors meeting last night for a hospital foundation, and a board of director, a layperson in fundraising, they wanted to know if we put more effort into one channel and away from another channel, do we make less money? And I had to remind them that because giving is in the majority impulsive, and because the findings show that all ages from time to time use all channels, the more integrated your program, the bigger the pie becomes, right? The more single gifts per donor across all ages, the higher average gift, the better we engage with any donor of any age. So just a reminder that all ages are increasingly omnivorous. They choose many different channels and many different ways to give when they engage with you. So you need to build a truly integrated program. So I'll hand it over to Dennis.
Thank you, Mike. And let me add on to that, and then we'll talk about the slide in a moment. Mike makes a great point. And I think if you go back to the part of channels and where the different ages are participating, one of the takeaways here should be for staff and board should be that civics are engaged online. And it has been a bit of a fundraising myth that simply because you're older, you're not online, you're not engaged in social or email, you're not visiting websites, and the survey makes that quite clear that that's not true, and that nostrum, that myth needs to go away for sure. So anyways, let's talk about making a difference. So one of the things we ask people about is, what makes the biggest difference? Here's a bunch of ways that you can help. What do you think makes the most difference? And two big takeaways, and not surprising, is that as you're younger, you believe that things that make a difference are volunteering. And then as you get older, that tends to diminish. But what you think makes a difference is, and as you get older, what you think makes a difference is financial support. And what is interesting in the U.S. anyways, and I forget what the finding was, Mike, in Canada, perhaps you remember, is that I think it was Gen Y, while they appreciated volunteering, actually didn't do nearly as much of it as boomers and matures did. So it was kind of a paradox of sorts. They thought there was value in it. They simply couldn't get off the couch. So it's really is an issue of that both, and we talk about in the report, both transaction channels and engagement channels. That volunteering is a critical and important area for people to engage with your organization, both as donors and as supporters. That support is essential and important to you carrying out your mission, and you need to give people opportunity to both, in part because that volunteering gives them the passion, the joie de vivre for your organization, and it becomes, and people say, well, they only volunteer a couple hours a month. Well, those may be very important hours for that person who's a boomer or a Gen X. So I think all opportunities for engagement or touching the supporter become important. Mike?
There we go. So hyper choice. In the study, we wanted to look at this idea of directed giving, the ideas of transparency, which are coming up more and more, especially with younger age subsets. So we wanted to ask some questions and get some data between the generations and find differences and similarities around directed giving, unrestricted giving, transparency. And I wanted to hand it back to Dennis to speak to this slide.
Sure, thanks, Mike. And there's actually a question here that I want to take because it's an important question. How much of a negative impact do the least acceptable methods have on revenue? For example, previous slides show that street canvassing can be relatively successful. So I'll give you my answer, then I'd ask Mike to add his answer because the answer may be slightly different. In the report, one of the contributors report, Mark Robner, states that your mileage may vary. Hence, your story will be different than somebody else's story. So I think that the question here is, if it's a more assertive strategy, say like street canvas, I think a couple things are important. One is make sure you have a reporting tool in place so you understand the long-term value of those supporters. Are they simply making one gift, or they sign up for monthly and then they cancel as soon as they possibly can? Do those people really become engaged supporters? And number two is, do you have the time and staff to be able to support campaigns in 4, 5, 6 channels? Or given the size of your organization or the annual fund, maybe that's more complexity than you can manage. So I think negative impact is both, can I manage it? And number two is, what kind of supporter am I bringing on board? And is that the person who I think will help drive the long-term success for my organization? Mike, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so around managing negative impact. So if we look at, for example, street or door-to-door or canvas, we need to have business rules in place, not just to track the donations and the transactive side, but non-donor intake. So it could be training, better training, making sure there's a non-commissioned, right, very relaxed approach to this sensitive way to raise money, but do non-donor intake. So ask for people's emails, people's feedback, even if you're not getting the gift. So making sure that some people can engage and you can contact them thereafter without making the absolutely hammer ask. So I think better training, non-commissioned approach, business rules that track more than just the transaction are ways that we mitigate negative impact. And there was another question of give us an example of an integrated giving campaign, or further explain what you would mean by that. So integration can take different approaches, but if we start with channels, then it would be an integrated giving campaign that puts together social media, direct mail, the telephone, all of these channels working together on one page and referencing one another back and forth. Because Dennis and I sit on the Integrated Marketing Advisory Board, every year we have an IMAB, that's its short form. It sounds like a very ugly fish that sits at the bottom of the sea. The IMAB awards look at and give awards to case studies of integrated campaigns. And so we have a slide at the very end where you can subscribe to the IMAB newsletter, and more than that, there's an IMAB award, integrated award case study document that you can get right away. So I think that'll be the best place for you to take a look at what we mean by that. And with that, I'll hand it back on giving preferences.
Sure, on this directed giving. And let me just say one thing is that, and I've said this before, most of the best examples of integrated marketing come out of Canada. And I think that the folks who review it are agencies and and consultants in North America, and consistently the great work that comes out of places like Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Calgary really stand out. So,
so what Canada is to hockey, it is also to integrated marketing.
You know, Mike, I don't know that I would go there, but that was a brave attempt. We'll see how you're talking in the middle of the wintertime, my friend, my dear Maple Leafs friend. Indeed.
Oh, I thought you meant the Olympics.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, I try not to pay attention to those. The Canadians tend to do quite well there.
So moving forward.
Directed giving preferences. And what would motivate me a great deal to make a larger gift? And a couple things, but let's focus for a couple seconds on the right side of the chart here, which is what would and it goes to the point Mike made earlier before about kind of transparency and information. And Gen Y is saying, almost 30%, that if they've got to decide where the funds went, that could make a difference. Or, look at that, 55%, understand the impact of my donation. And as importantly, frankly, either public recognition or a thank you gift doesn't move the needle very much. What that tells me right there is I'd like to have some input into where my funding goes, where my gift goes, but most importantly, tell me what did we accomplish. And I think that that's part in why we see the phenomena of crowdfunding growing quite quickly. And why we see a lot of do-it-yourself doing quite nicely is that people want to see the impact. They want to know they helped the person reach a goal. And this could be a challenge, frankly, for raising money for unrestricted giving, but I do think we have to be flexible and thoughtful about it. But people are raising their hands pretty high here and saying, I want across the board, but certainly less so for matures and boomers, is we want to see where our support goes. We want to understand that. And I think that's more than sending an electronic version of our annual report. I think video, I think tours, I think examples online of what's made a difference are profound. Right?
So when we look at the data in NextGen around transparency and directed giving, though we see a higher percentage of Gen X and Gen Y than older age subsets who want more specificity and impact, all ages in the majority are happy with really what the equivalent of wherever the need is greatest, put the money there. So though there is a rising need and necessity to give more impact and transparency information to younger age subsets, still larger percentages are happy to also know and accept that money can go where the need is greatest. So we just need to look at those results and look for the positive in that. And so when we look at transparency, symbolic giving, impact, we see it being represented from the smallest gifts to the largest gifts. So here's an example from Sunnybrook Hospital here in Toronto, in the east end of the city. And you can see on the right-hand side, very open, transparent goal setting and where we are in that fundraising goal for a very large item, major gift item. And on the left-hand side, symbolic and transparent and specific gift giving for smaller amounts. So I think these ideas of transparency, momentum, symbolic giving, and impact go up and down the food chain from large gifts to small. So the study was very careful to give you greater detail on not just the transactive issues of channel giving and generations, but also to look at the issues of engagement with generations and outreach with generations by channel and by organization. So I think that it's a key takeaway, and that means in some ways it's a tripartite study around transactions, around engagement and outreach. And for the fundraisers online, it means there's lots of goodies in this report that you can take to non-fund development departments. You know, the issues of engagement and outreach are important for marketing and communications, public relations. So maybe this can also be a bridge report as you build a more integrated cross-departmental approach. So I'll hand it back to Dennis, and he can speak just a wee bit on direct mail findings.
Absolutely. One of the things we ask folks is mail from a charity somewhat to very acceptable. And we find that most people, and surprisingly, Gen X and Gen Y find it acceptable. And this was very consistent with when we had done the survey in 2010. Go to the bottom. I gave a donation in response to the mail in the last 2 years. So what I find acceptable and what I respond is quite different for Gen Y and Gen X. Does that mean that they're not going to give to the mail? No, it means there's going to be a transition. We need to give them that. That is a channel they need to be exposed to, and they will respond. They're going to respond differently than their parents and grandparents, and they're probably going to be much more engaged, perhaps in email and online with following their friends in social. Yep. Next one, Mike, yours.
Yep. So I'll go through the next few slides, Dennis, if that's okay.
Please.
If we just take a look quickly at online, I mean there are really 2 or 3 key findings. One is the absolute ascent of Gen X donors in the red circle, 55% and rising quickly. It's a sweet spot for that age subset. You can see in the top right-hand corner in the gray, credit card is the way they would in the majority pay, but look, the influence of PayPal and its acceptance is quite high, so remember that when you're doing online giving. When we looked at engagement around workplace, and we wanted to cover different ways that different generations connect, we wanted to look at the workplace, and you can see here that across Gen Y, Gen X, and Boomers, there's reasonably high participation in workplace fundraisers. And thinking through how you engage Gen X and Gen Y, this might be a key way for your organization to do small, customized workplace opportunities. You can see payroll deduction is still owned by the Boomer generation, that United Way, federated health approach. But looking at workplace giving now, I grabbed this example from the National Cancer Coalition. And this is around hyper-customized workplace giving. So National Cancer Coalition is supported by BD. BD is a multinational medical supply and pharmaceutical company. In the past, BD has given both volunteer time and in-kind support to National Cancer Coalition to a Cuzco-based women's clinic. And now we created a digital online employee engagement campaign to further leverage that support that was both in-kind and volunteerism. So it's a sort of I'd say a hyper mission connected workplace giving opportunity. And so building on that, here on a micro level, this is Canuck Place in Vancouver, and last year they ran a very a symbolic, beautiful online campaign to light the lights on their hospice. But coming out of this was a workplace campaign online. So you can see here, during the holiday campaign, the third bullet, you can see an online employee giving campaign for a medium-sized business that was supporting the campaign. They realized, we want to do more, our employees want to do more, let's do this in a digital environment, and there was an extra $4,000 raised online. So big or small, how does the workplace fit into your generational giving plans? We also, just to show the breadth of the report, we looked at retail giving and Gen X and Gen Y, and that means retail giving where a portion is supporting a charity or a cause. Gen X and Gen Y are the right age subsets to truly leverage retail giving, and in the full report you'll be able to see how those details can help you if you do it in the future. So big picture, we've gone through 50 minutes. We've looked at multiple channels, the omnivorous nature of different age subsets. How do you put it together? Oh my gosh, it is a confusing thing. So when you read the report, we're talking about how do we combine the channels together, and this report is trying to show the channel ecosystem in an organized way. what channels and approaches fit into engagement in the majority for Canadian donors, which ones fit into a transactional sense, and which ones are you using for both outreach and transaction. So you can see as they get close to one another, they're being used for both, but how do we find the right combination? We're hoping with the report and this kind of slide, it just gets you thinking on how to sharpen the channel ecosystem combinations for your organization. So let's look at some of the fundamental and I won't say Homer Simpson profound because he's thinking of where his next donut is, but what are the next gen fundraising questions to ask yourself? I mean, number one for me is, you know, have I ignored the up and coming Gen X and Gen Y in the last few years by just sticking them into an unstrategic social media effort? Oh, let's go after 26-year-olds. And then someone in the room says, let's just give them a Facebook strategy. Clearly in our report, it shows younger age subsets are doing much more than that. So how do we find a better plan for younger generations? Dennis?
Sure.
Take a crack at that one.
Thank you, sir. Does my channel mix include direct mail for younger donors and digital communication for older? Referencing my point before, let's not make presumptions about age and channel. The report again shows quite clearly that direct mail has some efficacy with younger supporters, and the digital has clearly some strength with older supporters. So the key is the mix and the right mix for the right age. Mike?
Yep. So if we look at this idea of transparency, so are you thinking clearly about fundraising and engagement for Gen X and Gen Y, considering their predisposition and desire to have greater transparency and directed giving and specificity than you've been used to with traditional donors? Am I empowering my most enthusiastic supporters to fundraise and evangelize? So when we look at some of the data on word of mouth and what gets people to spread the word and which age subsets are more open to it, read through the report and think through how you can better leverage the people who truly believe in you. And so if we look at the key recommendations, number one, if this is a generational giving report, do you know your donors' birthdays? So I would love to know, and write this on the paper we told you to have, what percentage of your donor base now do you have their birthdays? And it could be 20, it could be 0, and think, how do I create a plan to layer on and get more information back from the donor to know more about who they are and what generational age subset they are. More key recommendations. Make donors happy. I think we have to do a better job of tracking satisfaction and using technology to make a more personalized approach to improve retention. We are generic in the past in our approaches, and we need to be more specific to age subset desires. And that means we have to think about inbound and outbound communications. There are things organizations can and should do to attract younger supporters. Are you doing enough? When we look at, and remember this is non-CRA giving as well. I mean, young people, X and Y, we think informally and formally are giving billions of dollars a year in Canada to charity. I don't think we're doing enough to take care of those people and inspire them. And it's not just about the tactics and the channels. So there is a whole cultural and change management process you need to go through. That might be another session in the next few months. How do you transform your organization? Increasing skill sets, changing governance, better business rules, better organizational structure to do better integrated fundraising. And we need to think about that. Conclusion, I mean, the future is here. Actually, it arrived a few years ago, probably. And I don't think as a sector, when we read through this report, that we are truly prepared. The commercial world has had the resources to watch and track and prepare and test and improve the way they talk to all age subsets, and I think we need to catch up, and we hope this report is helping you do that. The last few slides, some people were asking about examples of integrated fundraising. I think Dennis and I would say probably the best place to get that and to get Canadian content, because there are Canadian award winners, is to go to the Integrated Marketing Advisory Board's website, imabgroup.net, sign up, download the Hall of Fame, and you can see it in this screenshot on the bottom right. Make sure you fill out our survey, tell us what worked and what didn't today, and hopefully win a chance to, we can sit down together and figure a few things out. And last, if you saw value today in this first touch base on next generation giving in Canada, sign up today or sign up soon for our next session on October 10th. We've had consultants working hard to look at all of the extra data from the study just on social media and nonprofits. So we'll be publishing a white paper connected to this next webinar, and we'll have lots of good social media content on October 10th. So if you have colleagues or friends who want to get more about social media, or yourself, make sure that you come back for more. And I just wanted to thank everyone for listening today. We'll try to follow up and answer questions thereafter. We're capturing it all with Mark. And thanks so much. And Dennis, thanks so much for joining me today.
Mike, it's an honor always to sit with you on the phone and to talk over this really great report. So everyone have a great day, and Mike, you as well, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.